back in 2013, sort of born out of our own angst and taking care of our own elderly parents and looking at each other and thinking, wow, who's going to do this for us? And so we thought we better get busy and get serious about trying to organize an effort to be sure that, much like we tried to help our parents age in a very affirmative kind of way, whether that was at home or elsewhere, we wanted to be sure that we had that opportunity as well, particularly as LGBTQ people. I have here with me this evening some of our board members, John Cummings, Luann Carpenter, William Booth, and Amy Ham. And at some point this evening, you'll probably hear from each one of those. All right, so we have a lot to get accomplished today. So am I in show mode, do you know? I don't seem to be moving. Yes, I know, but it's not advancing.
Are you pushing the down button?
Yep. So I don't know if I went back out of show mode when we were playing with it or not. Sure. Sure. Well, basically, our mission is to, if you roll it all up, it's to help improve the lives of older LGBTQ people and what we call straight allies in the greater Dayton area. Because some of the issues that we talk about, they don't necessarily apply exclusively to LGBTQ people, but they may be more pronounced or more prevalent in the LGBTQ community. When we talk about marginalization, or we talk about discrimination and stigma, you know, there's something called intersectionality within the LGBTQ community, and you may talk about that yourselves with your clients. But sexual orientation, gender identity, as you know, cuts across all races, all religions, all socioeconomic strata. And so when we talk about our mission, it really applies to a lot of people who may find themselves with feet in multiple camps, and they may identify with multiple communities. You can find us on Facebook, on the web, Twitter, Instagram, we're everywhere. So we have some objectives we need to get accomplished tonight, and we'll try to get through all these things relatively quickly. We want to identify at least 3 historical events that shaped LGBT subculture. And I just want to make a note here that often in our presentations, you won't see the Q in LGBTQ. And part of the reason for that is because a lot of the research has shown, and we can attest to it individually, that older LGBT people tend not to like the use of the word queer. And often the Q refers to queer because that's been such a pejorative in our lives, used to sort of discriminate and stigmatize us. You won't see it often in literature materials focused on older LGBT people. Identify and understand at least 3 LGBT health disparities. Understand the differences between personal beliefs versus behaviors in providing care. I think you probably already get most of that. Identify at least 3 actions that might help provide culturally competent care, and identify and understand 3 key determinants of cultural competence and humility regarding our care. Are there any big questions that anybody has coming in? When you were coming to this meeting, you thought, you know, when I leave this meeting, I want to be sure I have an answer to this one thing. Anybody online have a burning question that we want to get captured? Because if so, we can capture it, write it down, and we'll be sure that we cover it as we go through the presentation. Nothing? All right. So why does this matter? Why does any of this, why should we be concerned about older LGBTQ people? Well, the LGBTQ community historically has had a tortured healthcare history. Everything from chemical castration to electroshock therapy to conversion therapy, you know, all sorts of manner of things have sort of been perpetrated, as we think of it, on our community to help fix us, to help make us different, to help make us straight, to cure our illness. And so it's not been a positive history for LGBTQ people, and most older LGBT people know that. Some of them have lived it, experienced it. And so, you know, when you have a community that's been marginalized and stigmatized and in some ways tortured in that way, Uh, it makes them reluctant to disclose, seek care, get the kind of health care that they need. There are some prevalent health disparities in the community, and we'll go through those in a minute. There's a general lack of medical training and knowledge. We know from research that most medical schools do not have curricula that are focused around LGBTQ care. And some people always want to know, well, how many of you are there? Why should we care about you? When you do the math using Williams Institute data, Williams Institute is a think tank at UCLA for LGBT issues. When you take their collection of their research and you also take information from the US Census Bureau and you sort of do the math, you get about a little over 27,000 people in the Miami Valley and in Butler and Hamilton counties. Those are just the two biggest counties down this way. Who are 50 and over in Southwest Ohio. It's probably much higher than that because we know that people underreport, right? When they have to self-disclose, they may be reluctant to say that they're LGBT. So, that's bigger than a lot of suburbs around the area. So you wouldn't go to a major suburb. The community I grew up in, Springboro, Ohio, is a desirable suburb south of Dayton. They have less people who live there than that. You wouldn't go to them and say, well, you don't matter. Your health care doesn't matter. So we shouldn't be saying that to LGBT people. And there's something that you may know about called a minority stress model. And so this has been studied repeatedly. Probably the person who's done the most work on it is Elon Meyer. He's at the Williams Institute at UCLA. And essentially what the minority stress model says is that if you live your life as part of a marginalized community, that creates a stress in your life that accumulates over the course of your life. And it impacts your mental health, your physical health, your ability to get care, your ability to get competent care. This is sort of what it looks like. So if you're in a marginalized community, it's creating a lot of stress in your life. You may not be able to find a doctor that understands your context, who you are, what even being LGBT, any one of those sections of the community means. They may not be knowledgeable about certain types of health care that you need. So if you're an older transgender woman and you go to the doctor and they may not understand anything about hormone therapy or the fact that you still need a prostate exam. So there are very practical things that do or don't happen around cultural competence, and that creates stress in a person's life, and we know it impacts their mental health, physical health, and over time it's sort of like sun exposure, to just put it simply. Sun exposure is cumulative over your life, right? So you might think that sunburn you got at age 10 doesn't really impact you, but if you keep getting those kinds of sunburns and sun exposure, you may very well have a very serious skin cancer issue later in your life. So it's sort of a simplified way to think about this. And we know that people who live in minority communities tend on average to die earlier than ones who are not in a marginalized community. Other things that make this important is right now, LGBT people sort of are living in a hostile environment, and that creates stress in your life. When you wake up in the morning and you think, well, maybe I'll be able to get the information that I need to understand a condition I might have, or maybe I won't, because they're not collecting data about my community, so that we don't know how to study my community, and they don't know how to get or develop the kind of health care that's needed. So right now there's a lot of stress in our community because whether it's from the CDC to HHS, there's a lot of talk about how we're going to be treated, whether we're going to collect data about the health in our community. And these are just some headlines that sort of speak to that. Now, there's something called a religious freedom and conscience department in Health and Human Services that essentially allows a healthcare provider to opt out of providing care if they have some sort of religious issue or something that they're being asked to do that preys on their conscience. So in other words, it allows them to sort of abandon their Hippocratic oath or some of their professional practice guidelines and say, I don't want to care for you. These are just some of the headlines that we're dealing with. So when we talk about why it's important, if you think that it's not stressful, to wake up every day, if you're a transgender person, and say, well, the government says that people preparing reports and budgets and so forth cannot use the word transgender, that kind of tends to negate your whole existence. And so those are just some headlines that exemplify what I'm talking about. All right, so as we get into our conversation here today, or this evening, I think it's important to understand what we mean by cultural competence versus something we call cultural humility. So cultural competence, I think you probably all have an idea of what that's about, right? It's learned practices and concepts. It's developing knowledge and skills, and you have standards and guidelines. You all have professional practice standards. But essentially what it says is, I am the expert. I know all of these things. I abide by these policies and procedures and standards, so I know what I'm talking about. But humility is how you translate and deliver all of that. It's the way you go about practicing what you know. So cultural competence is very I-oriented. Humility is very you-oriented. And I'm sure that you all have learned this and do this. It's about getting focused on the person in front of you and the context that they're bringing or the context that they're in. Understanding everything you can about this person so that you can get focused on meeting the need that they have. And it's very you-oriented. So what you sort of have to do is get comfortable with your own ignorance when it comes to serving or treating the LGBTQ community. Can't hear me?
They love you. You're getting awesome feedback. Okay. There's a lot of questions that are popping up now.
Okay.
So some of these are for later, but do you want me to share them with you so you can time? Okay. One is, are there books that you recommend, either fiction or nonfiction, about the LGBTQ community in general and or specifically related to the elder adult population? Question 2. Mm-hmm. Also, are there films or documentaries that could give insight and increase sensitivity into that as well? Yeah,
we'll start with the last question first, and then I think we'll get to some of the books as we go along. So there's a great film out called Gen Silent, Gen Silent, and it's about 6 or 7 years old now at this point. But essentially, what it does is it sort of chronicles the lives and travails of about 6 different people who are older LGBT people who are trying to figure out how they go about getting the care they need from people who are respectful and competent. And so it's called Gen Silent. Now, you'll have a chance to see this film pretty soon in February at a conference that we're having up in Dayton around LGBT aging, and I'll tell you more about that later. But it's, again, called Gen Silent. The producer is a gentleman named Stu Maddox. And so he'll be in town for our conference as one of our keynote speakers. And we'll talk about the books in a second. So humility is really about recognizing that there may be things about this person and the LGBT community that you don't know. And so you have to sort of fight the urge or resist the urge to immediately assume that what you have learned to date is applicable to this person who may be an African American, older, transgender person who's on Medicaid. That also speaks to mitigating power imbalances. We're, except for William, and I'm not sure about the people online, we all look Caucasian, we're all white here. Well, inherent in that whiteness is privilege. And so as you're dealing with your patients, your clients, it's important to understand that we have privilege because of our race and probably because of our culture. Okay. So what humility says is, you are the expert. I knew all of these things, but I'm going to listen to you, learn about you, so that I can better meet the need that you have. I'll give you a quick example. So I'm HIV positive. I've been HIV positive for 30 years. I'm what they call a long-term survivor. So for many, many years, when I would have to change doctors, and it still happens occasionally, you go into a new doctor, you fill out the form, the intake form, and it'll ask you for your health conditions. I check I'm HIV positive. It'll ask your marital status. So now, fortunately, I can say, yes, I'm married, but for years I would write in partnered. Go in, the nurse or the doctor comes in for the first visit, and they go down the form, they get to the fact that I'm HIV positive, and typically the first questions out of their mouths were, oh, are you monogamous? What about your partner? Are you too monogamous? So I understand the need for a physician to get to the information about what my sexual practices are, because obviously sex is one of the ways that HIV is transmitted. But that's not a humble way to do it. A better way to do that would be for the provider to say, I see that you're HIV positive. Tell me about that. Okay? You're all counselors, right? You get the open-ended question thing. But the point is that often did not happen and still sometimes doesn't happen. And now I've gotten much better and I'm older, more secure now, and I can say, let's back this up a minute or two. So that's just one example of how a person may be culturally competent around HIV and AIDS care, but the way they go about getting the information matters, and that's humility, right? All right, I'm going to turn it over to John here for a second.
Right, Mike. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Just giving Jerry a little bit of a break here. Okay, thanks. So we want to talk a little bit about why this history is important, why it's a real need to understand the background of the community a little bit. So here we're talking about some of the major symbols that are part of the LGBTQ community. We'll start with the lambda in the middle, the upside down Y that most people are seeing here. That was one of the earliest symbols that people knew. Places were LGBTQ friendly. They could trust people. They could go and converse with them a little more. It's kind of fading a little bit more now, but older LGBT folks know what that means because it was a symbol back in the 60s, 70s eras for them to know where they could feel safe. Over time, things have grown. You see the rainbow flag, the transgender flag, the pink triangle, which is internationally known from World War II and the concentration camps in Germany. And of course, the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest organization supporting LGBT rights in this country. A little bit more of the history. We start a lot with the Stonewall riots. If you're familiar with the late 60s, you know that places people went who were LGBTQ were very, I guess, secluded. People only knew about them by word of mouth mainly. But police in New York City, repeatedly raided these establishments and would arrest everybody. It was illegal activity at the time, correct? And, something was wrong with you if you were LGBTQ. Well, a variety of patrons decided to take it into their hands and rebel. And over several days, the Stonewall riots happened. So, Stonewall is synonymous with LGBT rights, and lots of things are now carrying that name throughout the country as well. Finally, in the early 70s, APA removed homosexuality from the DSM, which was a huge step for us going forward. And then the first elected official in the country, openly gay, was elected, Harvey Milk, in the San Francisco area Board of Supervisors. Just a year later, though, he was assassinated. I'm sorry, the name is escaping me right now, his killer. Dan White, thank you. I don't know why that didn't escape me, but at any rate, he claimed the Twinkie defense as a reason for killing Harvey Milk and the mayor as well. The Twinkie defense, of course, was that he was eating so many Twinkies it affected him and his judgment at the time. Junk food, right. So with that kind of defense, that inspired more riots in the area. And that was known as the White Night riots, correct, in that time. At the same time, the rainbow flag was adopted to give us more of a symbol in the community as well. And then HRC, of course, was founded in the 80s, early 80s, and the first cases of AIDS, which really ravaged our community quite a bit. But it also brought together the lesbian community with the gay community to fight back. The government was not funding a lot of the research that we were demanding at the time because we really wanted to save people. And we knew that this disease was going to make a jump to the straight community as well, and it did. So there was a lot of fighting, a lot of infighting around that as well as we move forward. So a lot of these things you'll see have come, oops, I'm pressing the wrong button. The red ribbon was part of the first AIDS cases reported, just to help people understand the significance of that time. A little more history here, don't ask, don't tell, big issue that faced President Clinton at the time when they were trying to figure out a compromise of helping LGBT folks serve openly in the military and those who did not want that at the time. Our, sorry, I'm forgetting his name, Leonard Math, sorry, was one of the first folks to step out and openly say, I'm gay and I've served in the military. Of course, his big claim to fame was that when he passed away, on his tombstone, you'll see here it says, when I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving one. So big push, big help for the gay community as they fought to repeal that. And finally in 2010, you'll see it was repealed. Civil unions, domestic partner benefits, registries also began to appear. There were different things happening around the country in different cities, different states. And of course, it developed a patchwork of various laws and ways of denoting marriage or partnership. Excuse me. Edie was a woman that you may know a little bit more about. She and her partner were together for several years, many years together. And when her partner passed away, she was not able to claim her Social Security benefits. Edie was not able to do that. So she sued the government to be able to do that. And that gave us federal marriage equality. The DOMA law was overturned that had to be signed, of course. But it still gave us a checkerboard and a hodgepodge of laws and mechanisms of letting people know that we actually could be partnered in the cities. Several cities adopted different registries, for example. But finally, in 2015, with the Supreme Court decision to allow full marriage equality, the Obergefell decision legalized same-sex marriage across the country. So we prefer to call that marriage equality for that. And now transgender troops are allowed to serve openly for now. You may remember a ban on that for a while, and that was finally overturned during the Obama years. Now that case is back with the Trump administration as well. It's now being fought in courts and is on hold. So, but the important point is to remember that no federal laws in Ohio, or no federal or Ohio law, excuse me, that prohibits people from being fired for being gay. You can still legally fire somebody for being openly gay in the state of Ohio and across the country. Some states, though, have no protection on housing too. Ohio is one of them. Discrimination is still real. This is why all of this history is still important. This is the case of Marcia, who has had a current legal case. We'll tell you a little bit more about how that the outcome of that has come about. But right now we'll show you a little bit about how this came about and what her story has been since she moved into a senior living facility. Let me just press that.
I don't think the people online are going to be able to hear this, but I'll send you the link after the workshop.
So that was a real, excuse me, a real great depiction of some of the issues that people face as they grow older in the LGBT community. With Marcia, her case has gone to court. It was not held up very well. The outcome did not happen in her favor. However, it was appealed again, and she did win that case. But it's issues like this that are really driving our need to help LGBTQ elders, find purpose and find support in their communities, whatever they decide to do at a later time, whenever they live at home and they want to age at home, or they want to move into a senior community, or they want to find a doctor or a lawyer or anybody else that's going to be a support to them in their elder years. So I'll turn it back over to Jerry. Yeah, sure.
When you said her case was resolved positively, was she actively pursuing property from the family, or was it a suit against the nursing facility, or?
Now I have green light. No, this was a case that was brought against the senior living community. And in the initial ruling, the court said that the community had no obligation to protect her, to keep her safe, simply because of her sexual orientation. So that was appealed, and the appeals court ruled in her favor and said, oh, no, yeah, you do. So, I mean, there are lots of issues that come to play here, that you see in the elder LGBTQ community. Oftentimes, especially people who are pre-Stonewall, because you will have cohort differences within the LGBT community, just like everybody else. They don't necessarily have chosen not necessarily to get married. Some people figure, well, we've been together for 35 years and things seem to be going okay, so why do we need to have, this sort of ceremony to say that we're married? And so sometimes when one partner passes away then, and maybe that partner's been the breadwinner, it leaves the surviving partner in the lurch. That's sort of what happened to her. Especially if the remaining family is not supportive or affirming, they may have technically legal rights to come into that situation and take the home, take the possessions, and that's sort of what happened to Marcia. We've had a couple of cases in our area in Dayton where that's happened. So the point is, we can do the right thing for people because they're human beings and they have very real needs. But if for whatever reason, organizations, institutions are not prepared to do that, the LGBT community is prepared to make them do it according to the law. So especially if they get any federal funds, we're still in a position, fortunately so far, where suit can be brought if they're receiving federal funds. And it's just important to know that let's do the right thing for individuals up front, because really all she wanted was just to live safely, to get the care and support she needed, just like everybody else. Our needs really aren't that different at the end of the day, but we may need some extra help and support because of stigma and discrimination, and that's what she was encountering in the community. You have a question?
Yes, I appreciate your coming tonight and talking, presenting. Couple things. If someone chooses not to get married and they want to remain partners, could the partner who was ill or sick, could she have in a will left the house to Marcia, and then this way the family could not take the her partner's family could not take that home away from her, or the finances?
She could have, if they had chosen to do that. That doesn't mean that the family still wouldn't have what they call right of representation to challenge it.
Really?
And that, I mean, so it does happen, but that could have been done. But here's the point about that. You're asking LGBT people to spend, in some cases, thousands of dollars to do a workaround when really all we want is to be have equal rights under the law.
Right, I understand. I was just trying to think of ways to protect.
Yeah.
protect
So
people.
that could have been done, but for whatever reason, they chose not to do that.
Is she still in the same facility? That she
As far as
decided
I
to
know,
leave?
she's still in the same
Are they
facility.
treating her better?
Well, the ruling, this last ruling is just about a month old, so I can't answer
Yeah,
that
I
question
hope they
yet.
are. That's
All right. So anything else? Okay. I just didn't want to rush out of that if you, okay. All right. So someone earlier asked about books. Someone, I think, remote. Velma, is that Velma Barber? Velma, I love you. All right. So books. Here's a good book that, I mean, it's maybe a little dry reading. It's definitely nonfiction. The Lives of LGBT Older Adults, Understanding Their Challenges and Resilience. You can find it through the American Psychological Association. A woman named Nancy Orrell. She was the assistant dean of the psychology department at Bowling Green State University here. She did a lot of research with older LGBT people in Northern Ohio and Southeast Michigan. And one of her colleagues from the University of Colorado, whose first name escapes me, Dr. Fruhoff, they sort of did this compendium of research and work. So you could find this book. Another book that is fairly recent is, the title is escaping me, but it's written by a woman named Kimberly Aquaviev. I'll email it to you. But she has written a book about sort of end of life issues and care at the end of life and hospice care, that kind of thing. But I'll email it to you. It's Kimberly Aquaviev. Yes. Yes, that's it. Yeah. But these are some of the major areas that Dr. Orrell and various others have identified among older LGBT people. And is there anything that you notice about them? Anything that jumps out at you? It's right here at the bottom of the screen. The issues are the same as straight people, but the importance or rank can be different and often is. So for example, you see number 2, priority is legal issues. I'm not so sure that the average older straight person, and I'm using that term sort of loosely and generically, so it's a shortcut, forgive me, would have legal issues as number 2 on their list. But because of some of the issues that you just asked about, around maybe having special codicils, wills, things like that, that can transfer property or give people rights, those are special issues because all of our laws do not treat us equally. So I talked earlier about cohort issues, and this is where some of the symbols that John was talking about when he was going through the history matter. So people who are pre-Stonewall versus people like me who came along just after Stonewall. So I was born in 1960. I'm 57 years old. I don't remember Stonewall, but I do remember Harvey Milk, from the 1970s, and I remember when he was assassinated. So people who are pre-Stonewall, because they came of age at a time when homosexuality was illegal, and I use the term homosexuality again loosely, I don't really like that term, but it meant the end of their lives if they got caught with someone of the same sex. So they would get arrested, their name would be printed in the paper, they would get fired, they'd lose their family lives. I mean, this was very real. And so they tend to be more reserved, less willing to come out, especially as they get older and move into senior living communities or nursing homes. They feel like they have to recloset because they're afraid that they will be discriminated against, not get the supportive care they need, or worse yet, abused. Now, AARP, I'm going to pass around a couple of articles here, and I can email them to you, and you can send them to the people online. So AARP over the last year did a huge study called the Maintaining Dignity Study. And the results of that study showed basically what I just told you, that there are really prevalent concerns among older LGBT people about getting care that they need in senior living communities or long-term care, that sort of thing. You can see some of the stats. Here you can see 76% are concerned about having adequate family and or social support as they age. And part of this is sort of inherent in being an older LGBT person. Again, if you are, let's say, in your 60s and up, you grew up in a period where this was very real dangerous stuff to be known as a, quote, homosexual. And so often that meant that you were alienated from your family if you were out because your family thought you were wrong, bad, a sinner. Pick a word. And most of us, especially most older LGBT people, don't have children. They don't have a built-in support network. So they're alienated from what we call their family of origin, and they don't have some built-in support as they age. And so it makes them very fearful. And you can see 90% of them, seniors report having no children compared to 20% of their cisgender heterosexual counterparts. So some of these things also relate to where we started around the minority stress model. You know, if you're dealing with these sorts of things throughout your life and you get into later life, they have both very real acute impact on your life, but then you're also dealing with sort of the residual of living through all of that history that John talked about, everything from being a criminal, essentially, if you were homosexual, to seeing one of your political leaders assassinated. I can tell you for myself, I was a teenager when Harvey Milk was assassinated. I can remember the news stories about him. I was looking to this guy to be essentially my savior, you know, to show us the way into the promised land. And then suddenly he was gone. And so I can remember going into my bedroom and sitting down on my bed and thinking, well, now what am I supposed to do? But Harvey Milk, if you ever heard him or knew him, one of his big things was you have to come out. You have to come out. That's the only way that people will see how many of us they are and that people that they love are gay or LGBT. And so I thought, well, that's what I'm going to start doing. So in 1978, 77, 78, I was 17 years old. I started coming out. And I've been coming out ever since. Because it's a process. So you will get cohort effects in our community. You'll get folks who are pre-AIDS, who lived through the AIDS crisis, and people who came along after the AIDS crisis. And I can tell you, if you did not live through the AIDS crisis and experience it firsthand, there is no way to explain the horror of it. You know, and what that created for people in the community was just tsunamis of grief. And so if you can imagine, you know, one day you're talking to your friend and the next day you call that friend and that friend doesn't answer the phone. And moreover, you can't figure out what happened to that friend because their family may have come and taken them away, wafted them away, so nobody knew that they died of AIDS. And your friends are just gone. Or maybe you're actually with your friends when they die, and it's happening day after day, week after week. And so imagine what that kind of grief does to a person. So, but if you didn't experience that, you think, oh, well, you know, AIDS, HIV, that's a manageable thing. We got this. So you have very different mentalities. So somebody who's pre-Stonewall, and I have friends, many who are pre-Stonewall, you know, it's not going to bother them as much probably to sort of hide a little bit, not be quite so out. They have to go into a senior living community. You know, they don't feel like they have to hold their husband's or wife's hand when they go down to the dining room. But that's not going to be me. Can you hear me? Hello? All right. And another issue that is important to understand is that when you have lived through all of that history and you haven't had legal equality, it has very real impact on your financial security over time. So for example, John mentioned Social Security survivor benefits. This is a pending case right now. Helen Thornton and Marge Brown. They were together for 27 years, had a child together. Marge passed away, made more money than Helen, but because they didn't have the opportunity to get married before Marge died, Helen has no ability to go back and claim any of her Social Security survivor income. And, you know, income matters when you retire, when you get older, right? I mean, you know, for most people, every dollar matters. And so that's an example of how, that's an example of how our laws over time impact older LGBT people in ways that you might not imagine or think about. So we'll see what happens with that case. She's suing to be able to go back and claim the survivor benefits from her partner who died. And we had a situation like that in Dayton that we know well. There are many, but one that I know very well was friends of ours. They'd been together for 45 years. Now, the Marriage Equality Supreme Court ruling happened in June of 2015. That's when the ruling said, no matter where you live, no matter what state, you can get married. But one of the people in this couple passed away in April of 2015. He had been the breadwinner, made a lot more money than the other person, and so the surviving spouse had no ability to go back and claim any of that survivor income. All right, housing. It's a big issue, right? So if somebody does want to or need to move to a senior living community or long-term care, what have you, we know that there is discrimination that still exists. The Equal Rights Center a few years ago did a secret shopper study across 10 states. Ohio was one of the states. And they found that almost 50% of the time, same-sex couple or spouse experienced at least one type of discrimination. In Ohio, you can see it was about 45% of the time. So, but it wasn't blatant. You know, they didn't have signs out or somebody at the door saying, we won't let you be here because you're gay. But they would emphasize various things or deny that they had certain facilities available. So a same-sex couple could go in and say, we'd like to have a one-bedroom apartment. And they would be told, we don't have any one-bedroom apartments. Sorry, thank you, goodbye. Straight couple would go in behind them and they'd say, oh, we have this lovely one-bedroom apartment. Guess what? It's right down the hall next to the fitness facility and the salon. You know what? And guess what? We're going to waive your move-in fees. So it was those kinds of things that were happening. If any of you know about sort of redlining that occurred, you know, particularly around racial issues. Many years ago, they would redline districts so that banks wouldn't make loans to African American people who wanted to live in certain communities. Am I right, William? Similar kind of thing, you know, kind of under the radar and subtle. But you can see here also that fear drives people back in the closet, just as I mentioned. If you look at the Maintaining Dignity survey results that I passed around, you can see that there's concern about having to hide their identity to access suitable housing, and that many are afraid that they'll be forced to hide in long-term care. This is a pending case as well. These two ladies, Mary Walsh, Bev Nance, they live in St. Louis. They wanted to move into a senior living community, did all their homework, chose one they liked, filled out the paperwork, put down their deposit. They were getting ready to move, and they got a call saying, oh, no, we don't accept married lesbians. We don't accept lesbians who are married. So no can do. You can't live here. So again, they don't look so scary, do they? And it doesn't matter how they look. You know, the point is they're human beings who want to have a safe place to live as they age together in an affirmative way. General health disparities. So again, thinking about the minority stress model that we talked about early on, when you are afraid to get care because you're afraid you'll be discriminated against, when you can't find a physician that is competent and understands health care that applies to you as an individual, maybe you don't have the money because maybe you lost your job because you got fired because you're gay. You know, all of these sorts of things are very real situations that happen. That kind of impacts your ability to get competent care. And so we know from a collection of research that LGBT people tend to get less preventive care than the population in general. Lesbians are at higher risk of some cancers and type 2 diabetes. Transgender care is a whole category of issues unto itself. We could have a whole other session about transgender care. It's highly politicized. Most people don't understand it. Very few culturally competent providers. Gay men at higher risk of HIV and other communicable diseases, especially in communities of color. Exponentially higher rates of smoking, substance abuse, suicide attempts, and suicide success, especially among young people. It's between 4 and 6 times as high as the general population. And bisexual health is basically just ignored because people don't know what bisexuals are. All right. So in terms of experiences, this data here is based on AARP's Maintaining Dignity study and a healthcare study that Lambda Legal did, the organization that helped Marsha Wetzel, who filed suit for Marsha Wetzel. They did a healthcare study just a few years ago, and they found that over 40% of the time, lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals had negative experiences. 70% of transgender people had negative experiences. And for HIV people, it was 63. There are some other quite unique health disparities around dementia. So for people who are HIV positive, there's something called HAND, or HIV-associated neurocognitive disorder. It sort of mimics dementia and Alzheimer's, but it's related to how the HIV virus works in the body. And there are also some issues around transgender dementia. We've know of a situation like that in Dayton, where we live. So a person who's in a senior living community, they're a transgender person, but because the long-term memory is sort of the last to go, sometimes they will revert back to their prior identity. And then the next day, they're identifying with their current identity. The next week, they may revert. So trying to provide care in these situations can be very challenging. And you really need people who understand what's happening with LGBTQ healthcare. GLAMA is a professional association. It's the Gay Lesbian Medical Association. You can go out online. You can search for competent providers in your area. There are other resources, but that's a big one. We talked about mental health disparities, but it's true throughout an LGBT person's life. And we're speaking in generalities, right? I mean, you know, I've never tried to commit suicide, but, you know, many people have, and many have been successful. And when you live your life being told from the time you were a child, you're bad, you're wrong, you're sinful, you're disgusting, you're going to burn in hell, whatever the sort of issue is, that has an impact on you over time. And some people, quite frankly, just can't cope. And what do people do when they're trying to cope? Some people have very healthy behaviors. You know, some work out, they develop a hobby, but some people don't. We're just like everyone else in the world. Some people smoke, they abuse substances because, you know, they're trying to cope with all of their regular life issues. Could be employment, relationships, what have you. And on top of it, They could get fired because if somebody finds out that they're gay. Or they might not be able to get into a senior living community because they're a lesbian couple. So when you have that kind of stress on top of just sort of your general life issues, it can wear on you mentally. This person here, you may know who he is. This is Alan Turing. He's a British person. He's known as the father of modern computing. He helped break the Nazi code in World War II. Actually, he alone broke the Nazi code in World War II, which helped us win World War II. So without Alan, most of us probably wouldn't be sitting here. Or if we did, we might be speaking a different language. And some of us might not be here at all. But homosexuality was a crime. He was gay. And so he was convicted of homosexuality, and they gave him a choice: chemical sterilization or jail. So he chose chemical castration, I should say. And when that didn't go really quite so well, he just decided, well, I'll just kill myself. So when we talk about older people who are in their 60s, 70s, and older, these are the kinds of experiences that they have seen, heard about, and lived. This is from Community Market Insights. They're sort of the Bible of market research in the LGBTQ community. This is from their 2018 study. This has over 18,000 people in this study, with this survey. So it's a pretty robust survey. And you can see here what some of the top issues are: depression, mental health concerns. Oddly, for millennials and Gen X's, it's higher, a lot higher than for baby boomers. But when you look down the list, you see losing or not having access to health insurance, still pretty high across all of the generations. So I guess the point here is I'm not making this stuff up. These are real issues that have been studied, surveyed, researched, and there's data to back all of this stuff up. So please take me seriously. Yes.
Is to me. I am still stuck on something. Can you hear? Whoever couldn't. Okay. How can that be legal to fire somebody because they're gay? I don't understand.
Because well, we've actually made a lot of progress, even though it seems astounding to hear that. Well, we've come from just in 50 years or so, 60 years, from homosexuality being a crime to being able to now marry, and in some cases adopt children. So it's the sweep and arc of time, but it's just the reality. There are no laws that protect a person in Ohio or federally in employment because of sexual orientation. Now, we have seen some cases, and some, especially under the last administration, where government officials were interpreting discrimination based on sexual orientation as discrimination based on sex. So, because if you think about sexual orientation, if somebody's discriminating against you because, let's say me, because I'm a gay man and I have a husband who's a man, and I am attracted to men. If that's why they're discriminated against me and they fire me, that's because of my sex, in a sense. And so there have been some interpretations to include sexual orientation under that sex part of the non-discrimination clause at a federal level. But that's not consistent. And there's a saying that you hear a lot in the gay community: you can get married on Saturday and go to work on Monday and get fired. And that's the truth.
So what are we going to do about that?
Well, we're here talking to you tonight because we want you to be able to understand some of these issues, so that when you have someone who is in turmoil or in crisis, or maybe you're dealing with their families as well, you're able to say, you're able to understand some of the issues and try to help interpret them in a way that they can understand that we're just human beings like everyone else. We have the same needs for safety, for health, for love, relationships, and so we're counting on you to help accomplish that. We also lobby and advocate in many different ways to do that. We have both local, state, and national organizations like Lambda Legal and the Human Rights Campaign that employ people full time to be working on issues to change the laws. But it takes time, and it's sometimes can be sort of a Sisyphean task, if you know that Greek analogy of pushing the boulder up the hill. Yes.
D. Stinnett online says, that is why it's so important for us to do our research and vote. If we don't do this, these issues will continue.
Exactly.
Everybody says amen.
So I mentioned smoking, tobacco use, 2 to 3 times the rate of the general population. These are just some stats here sort of backing up what we talked about. This is drug disorders. The purple bars are sexual minority, and the green bars are sexual majority. And this is SAMHSA data from 2015. So you can see that across almost every case, the sexual minority rate is 2 to 3 times higher, whether it's illicit drugs or alcohol, alcohol alone, marijuana, pain relievers. And again, what do people do when they try to cope? Yes.
I just want to share something. I think Stinnett, I had shared this with you, that I just want to brag about my mom and my parents and the way I was raised. My mom's 98 years old. I lost my dad when he was about March rather, and he was 98 going on 99 in June. And my mom, one of my mom's best friend, Pat, called my mom maybe about, 2-3 years ago and said, Irene, I don't know what to do. And she's like, what's wrong? Is, someone sick? She goes, it's I forget the name of one of her daughter's twin grandchildren. She said, my beautiful granddaughters want to become men. And so she said, well, that's wonderful. She said, you should love them. She says, but did you hear what I said? And she goes, yes. And my mom is good-hearted, and she's solid, a smart woman, thinker at 98. And she said, love them. And it just kept talking to her like over, a period of time to just, they're your grandkids, love them. And I was just so proud of her that I grew up like that. My parents loved everyone. So I just want to share that.
And we want more of that.
You're not talking in your microphone.
Maybe my mother should go to the nursing homes and talk to people.
We want more of that, and we're counting on you to help create that. It's all on you. So what does successful aging for LGBT elders look like? Like what should, we've come through a lot of bad stuff, right, to get to this point. So we want to have the ability to display a positive LGBT identity, no matter where we are. So what does that mean? It means some of the examples I mentioned earlier. So, wherever I'm living, I want to be able to kiss my husband in public. I want to be able to hold hands if we want to. We want to have our friends over. Some of them are LGBT and enjoy a good time. We want to have psychological comfort and ease with disclosure. So there are lots of ways that you can create that. We talked about trying to suspend, to be humble, right? So of course you want to be using all of the things that you've learned and that you practice. You're professionals, you've got degrees in this. But being humble in the way you deliver it matters, and respectful of the fact that there's a real power imbalance. Number one, there's a power imbalance when you're the counselor, right? And there's power vested in that positional authority. But then there's also power in the fact that, assuming that you happen to be, let's say, a white, straight, cisgender person, there's tremendous power in that and privilege in that. So understanding how to suspend that and just listen and try to focus on what the actual need is, not on how they're dressed, not on who they're with, not on who they love, not on who they, may be having sex with. So having psychological comfort needs matters. And you can help with that with some of the symbols that we showed earlier. If in addition to the way you practice your profession, sometimes just having a symbol that tells us that you're safe matters. So John showed some of the symbols, the rainbow flag, the pink triangle, the transgender flag. Yeah. So just having something, if you have a padfolio that you use or something when you're talking with clients, just having a sticker on the customer facing side of that sends a signal to them, oh, this person is probably safe. Or, pin something up in your office so that as you're sitting talking with someone, they see a transgender flag and they think, oh gosh, this person gets us. They at least have some understanding of what transgender is, so I can talk with them. So there are all sorts of ways that you can create psychological comfort. You've probably heard about pronouns, use of pronouns. For some people, you hear it especially with emerging generations of LGBT people, not so much with older folks like me, but they will declare their pronouns. So I'm Jerry, my pronouns are he, him, and his, because they're talking about their gender identity, which isn't always what you see. But if you use pronouns, it will send a signal to this person. They understand our community. I can talk with them. They're safe. Now, that's a whole different session to talk about pronouns and gender identity. I'm assuming you know the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. But if not, we'll come back and talk about that. So affirming and supportive relational and community contexts. You know that, right? That's sort of social work psychologists speak. But I'll elaborate on it. So we want to have affirming and supportive relationships with people, whether that's a counselor, whether that's a co-resident in a community, whether that's the staff of the community. We want to know that who we are is honored and supported and affirmed. Likewise, in whatever community we're in, we want to know that we're safe, affirmed as people, as human beings, and respected for who we are. We're very resilient. Resilience is a big term you hear a lot, right? We're a very resilient community. We've had to be. We've had to figure out how to work around the law, how to kind of create codes, either in language or dress. We figured out how to survive through a lot of really bad things. We'll help you. If you happen to say to somebody, I know that you want to have a pride celebration here in this senior living community, but if we just do that full on bold right out of the gates, we're going to have some issues with other residents. So let's figure out how we can together pull that off. And we will love it, because we'll be like, we're going to pull one over. We're going to figure this out. We're going to get this done, and we'll be gone before people even know it happened. So my point is that we get it. We've had to live in a world that's sort of like, for lack of a better term, a left-handed person in a right-handed world. We get it. We'll work with you. Just talk to us about it. And we do need legislative and government protections to support us. Back to there's no law that protects us from being fired. And in Ohio, a landlord could say to me, I'm not renting this apartment to you because you're gay. And that's legal. So until we fix things like that, we need people like you to help provide a safety net, help provide understanding and enlightenment and support and affirmation. And speaking of resilience, we'll come back and talk about this maybe sometime. There's something called crisis competence. There's been research around crisis competence. And basically what that says, if you have survived traumatic experiences in your life, like possibly being arrested, jailed for being homosexual, or living through the AIDS crisis, or I'll use myself as an example, being a long-term survivor, you have learned skills that help you know how to cope, that help you learn how to be an advocate, how to fight back, how to survive. And so crisis competence is pretty prevalent in our community. So guidelines for practice. These are important underlying principles that I'm sure you're aware of and you probably practice every day. You want to respect people's identities and their experiences. So if you're dealing with someone who is pre-Stonewall, you know, in their 60s, 70s and up, understand they've been through a lot of crap as an LGBT person. And so respect that. Try to understand if maybe they don't want to really just come out and tell you this woman that they keep bringing to their sessions, or this person who keeps showing up to visit them at the senior living community but never wants to stay, but just comes and drops off, you know, maybe some cookies or clothes or what have you, might be their partner. So being respectful of their identities matters. Avoid assumptions about sexual orientation, which we call heterosexism. So you think, well, what is heterosexism? It's assuming basically that everybody you meet is probably straight. I'll give you an example real fast. Valentine's Day. I was in a rush to get home because I knew John would be expecting me there for Valentine's Day. I stopped at the bank to make the deposit for the company that I worked for. And it was like, they closed at 6. It was like 2 minutes till 6. So I'm rushing around trying to get out. And as I'm leaving, one of the managers of the bank said, oh, you got to get home. You got to stop and get a present for your wife on the way home, right? And I was like, I don't have time for this right now. I was out the door in the car. Had I had more time, I would have said, no, for my husband, actually. And you probably shouldn't say things like that to customers when you're in your bank. You know, you can say for your spouse, or just say you got to rush home and get a Valentine's gift, right? But that's an example, really microcosm example of heterosexism. It's like, how dare you presume I'm straight? You know? Other guidelines for practice. We talked about many of these already. Critically analyzing your personal professional attitudes and assumptions, and having some respect for how culture, religion, media, and service systems influence decision making. So we talked about heterosexism already. This is a little example of ageism. I just thought it was funny, so I threw it in here, this picture. We know we live in an ageist society, right? Ageist culture. So this is a Tommy Hilfiger ad. And you can see, you know, all these good-looking younger folks here, way back here on the rock in the back, like tiny little guy who's looks like he's in his 60s or older. So I guess we don't buy clothes. We don't want to be fashionable. So my point is that you see ageism creep into things all of the time. And, you know, particularly for LGBT people, you know, youth and beauty in the LGBT community is like on hyperspeed compared to the population in general. Youth and beauty is, trust me, worshipped to a degree that is almost unfathomable. So these are things to be aware of. Rely on your professional code of ethics. Understand a little bit about laws and civil rights, some of which we've talked about. But if you can just take a little bit of time to understand some of these things, maybe do a little research on them, it matters. Things like not being able to claim Social Security survivor benefits has a big impact on an older person and their income. So it could help explain why maybe this person doesn't have the resources, even after being with someone, a partner, for 40 years. Look at organizational policies and procedures. Let's see, appreciating intersectionality and differences within cultural subgroups. Does everybody understand when I say intersectionality, does everybody understand what that is? Yes? No? Okay. So intersectionality, particularly in the LGBT community, speaks to sort of the cross sections of identity and need that may exist. So consider an African American Jewish lesbian. That's intersectionality. Or a Muslim gay man. So you're dealing with multiple contexts So, you know, African Americans, by virtue of their race, as well as some historical issues, have more prevalent health disparities. Likewise, LGBT people do. So you're dealing with a variety of contexts there. So try to just think about that. And we've talked about some of these theories of aging and social and health perspectives. And I'm sure these won't be new to most of you. So there's something called person and environment theory, right? So understanding the person's environment, and maybe you're actually treating them and caring for them in their environment, but having a respect and understanding of context. Life course theory. We talked about history, right? So when you look at someone's life course as an LGBT older person, it's very different, or can be very different, than someone who is straight. So real fast, somebody, think about this for a second. Name 3 major national events that have shaped your life, that have been important to you in life, in one way or another. Anybody? Yeah. Anything else? And big events? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
9/11.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So you can see sort of the overlap and disparity in some of them for LGBT people. Like for me, I would say 9/11 was definitely one. Marriage equality is a big one. So just points up that understanding a person's life course really matters. You know, some of our experiences are the same. Some of the major national pivotal events are the same, but some are very different. Using appropriate language helps show respect and build rapport. I'm not going to go into all of the detail about why you should use this term versus that term, but understand there are some charged terms in the LGBT community. Homosexual is one. Try not to use that word because most people know that originally its origin is around illness, disease, and crime. And it also defines you completely based on your sexual act or sexual practice rather than a full human being. So I don't know about you, but I have a lot of things going on in my life. You know, who I have sex with and how often I have sex is like a minuscule amount of time. I got a dog, I got a husband, I got a job, I got to go to the grocery, I got to do my laundry, you know, all the things that everybody else does. So when you use a term like homosexual, it reduces us to something that has historically been wrong, bad, and is all about sex. So just a quick one. For transgender folks, being misgendered is very important. So if you are working with transgender people, or if someone identifies to you as transgender and they say, I'm a trans man and my name is whatever, use that name. Even though their birth certificate may say something else, their sex assigned at birth may indicate something else, or maybe they had their origin name on some forms. If they tell you what their name is, use that name, not what's on the form. And you'll sometimes hear them they'll say, don't use my dead name. And what they're saying is that name is not me. That name is dead. And so if you hear that term, dead name, you'll know what it means. If you make a mistake, and again, there are different terms and terminology that we could go into, but when you know that you've offended someone or they tell you that you've offended them because you misgendered them or what have you, just apologize sincerely and say, I'll work to do better, and then move on. Don't belabor it. Don't keep saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't believe I did that. Please forgive me. Oh my goodness. You know, just sincerely apologize and move on and try to do better. Because once you start making it all about you, it's like, oh, I'm so awful. Oh, it's like, you know what? I'm not here to deal with your grief or discomfort about, a mistake that you made. We acknowledge it, we move on. Ask open-ended questions. Just ask somebody, how do you identify yourself? Or, you could just introduce yourself in a way that implies openness and safety. So again, you could say, I'm Katie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, assuming that they are. And that tells people right away in our community, these people get it. Or you could ask a question, an open-ended question like, who are the people who are important in your life? Rather, if you're trying to, maybe you think you've got clients and maybe they're a couple or maybe they're LGBT, but you're trying to find a way to raise that issue without offending, you could just ask a question, open-ended. Who are the people who are important in your life? Broad areas to assess in organizations. You want to look at your policies, organizational policies, legal policies, policies, procedures. Look at your forms. How do you collect and utilize demographic and gender and relationship information? So try to be non-binary. You may already know this, but rather than saying male, female, just ask about gender. Rather than saying husband, wife, just say spouse. Rather than saying father, mother, just say parent. So try to be non-binary. It's not either or. Gender can be very fluid. It can be very expansive. Your recruitment, training, and your culture. And then imagery in your environment. Does the environment tell LGBT people that they're welcome and friendly? Again, think about some symbols that we talked about earlier. Flags, pink triangle, etc. But it's more than just symbols. You got to be able to back up the symbols. You got to be able to live into and practice into what the symbols represent. These are just some other ways that you might consider making a difference. You want to include sexual orientation, gender identity in all your policies and procedures. That's for employment, residents, visitors, clients. Let everybody know you're welcome here. Obviously, education is important. Maybe recognize some important celebrations and dates in the LGBT community. June is LGBT Pride Month. That's because Stonewall, the riots that were the pivotal civil rights movement in modern history, happened in June. So that's why June is a big deal for LGBT people. Transgender Awareness Month is coming up in November. And there'll be Transgender Remembrance Day on the 20th to recognize people who have been killed or committed suicide because they're transgender. So there are a variety of these. We're in LGBT History Month right now. There's a great site called lgbthistorymonth.org. Oddly enough, you can go and find all sorts of information there about people who have been pivotal in LGBT history. World AIDS Day is coming up, and Bisexual Health Month is in March. We talked about forms a little bit, but one thing you might want to know about forms is when you're trying to assess gender, sex, use a two-stage form. So you could ask them, what is your current gender identity? And then secondarily, what sex were you assigned at birth? Because, especially with healthcare, sometimes this is important to know. Think back to the example I gave you about the older trans woman who may still need a prostate exam. So when you have dual questions for identity, it can tell you a lot in a healthcare setting. We talked about symbols. These are important. Does anybody know what this symbolizes? This inverted pink triangle? Yep. So during World War II, when the Nazis were rounding up people who were the undesirables, if you were even thought to be homosexual, you didn't have to be, but if you even thought to be homosexual, you got rounded up and put in a camp. And the men had to wear pink triangles, and often the women who were thought to be lesbian had to wear black triangles, just like the Jews had to wear the gold Star of David. This was just a derivative of that. And when they needed to do their medical experiments, you know, without sanitation or anesthesia, they'd go get the gay people first because they were among the least desirable. So the trans flag, this is what this is. So the blue stands for boy, right? Pink stands for girl, and the white stripe in the middle stands for transition. And this is just a symbol of equality. And of course, the rainbow flag that grew out of the Harvey Milk assassination and the subsequent riots. And we talked about environment earlier as well. So the future is kind of bright. I don't know if you want to take time to play this little segment off the radio or not, maybe more trouble than it's worth. But this was a NPR segment, Valentine's Day this year. John and Jerry, oddly enough, John and Jerry. Not us, obviously. One of them is this guy here is 100 years old. This guy here is like in his 70s. And it was a story about them getting married in their senior living community where they live in, I believe, California. And so back to your point earlier, you know, things are getting better. They can be a lot better. We want to make them better. But it's not all doom and gloom. You know, there is hope on the horizon, and these two guys were just the cutest. And if you listen to the story, you can go look it up on NPR. It's just really sweet. I know.
Kathy says he doesn't look like he's 100 years old.
So I brought us in with 2 minutes to spare.
Anybody online have questions? Or type quickly. Everybody wants to know what the last two slides are.
They're counting.
Well, that's me, John, and our little dog, Rosie. We call her Royal Highness. And this is just a list of some resources. Not an exhaustive list, but you can see we're right there at the top, and you already know how to find us. There's the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging, Lambda Legal, which is a big civil rights legal organization. There's a National Center for Transgender Equality, Human Rights Campaign, and the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, or GLAAD. That sort of serves for our community sort of like the Anti-Defamation League that you often will see engaged on issues around anti-Semitism. That's sort of like our version of the Anti-Defamation League. So those are the last slides.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious actually about the panel, and I know we're at the 7:30 mark, but I'm so curious about who's on the panel and what to share from that, and I'd love to stick around for a little while longer and you know, hear if people want to talk, but I just wanted to ask about that.
I apologize for that. I wanted to be sure we got through all of our objectives, but all. Go for it. So we have, just as elaborate, so Amy and Luann both work in senior living communities at Bethany Village in up south of Dayton. You know, you can all speak for yourselves. William is a organizer for the AIDS Healthcare Foundation in Ohio, so he travels all over Ohio doing advocacy work and client service for people who have HIV and AIDS. John works for Mental Health Recovery Services in Warren for Warrington County, so the Mental Health Board for those two counties. I'll shut up.
So you just want to know who we are? Well, I'm Amy Ham from the Somerville area. I've only been part of the board for, I don't even know, 6 months maybe, and got joined to ask by a couple of my friends who aren't here tonight. And I don't know what else to tell you. I work in senior living. I've worked in senior living since the mid-1980s. I'm the straight ally in the group. So my experience has just been I'm a musician and I've been in musical theater, so I have a lot of gay friends. And when my friends approached me and told me what the group was doing, I'm like, oh my gosh, how neat to combine what's been my career, what's been my hobby and my love, and to serve on a board with a couple of friends is a new experience.
Okay. Myself, my experience, I also live with HIV, and due to a situation with healthcare, when I was diagnosed with a doctor making a statement to me, he came into the office and said, "Your semen is deadly," and turned around and walked out. 20 minutes later, a nurse came in and said, "Are you ready to go?" So luckily I was educated enough to know what I needed to get done, but it made me realize I needed to get involved in this world of advocating for people with HIV and healthcare. Been involved in it I've been diagnosed in 2002. In 2003, I bust down that other wall of being an advocate for people who are HIV positive. Got involved with some things with the health department, met some of the people from his group, and realizing that I'm starting to work on people who are older living with HIV, and it's like, what are we going to do? Because a lot of these people have been ostracized from their families. Now we're getting into older age. Someone's going to have to be there for them, and I'm seeing it more and more and more. And so once I got introduced to what was going on with Rainbow Elder Care, I became a part of it.
My name is Luann. I'm a registered nurse and have been for 39 years now, the majority of this in long-term care, which is my passion. And for the majority of that period of time, I had a relationship with somebody who was my good friend. And she helped me raise my two children. I was married at one point, a boy, a daughter, and a son. And together we raised our children. And it wasn't, I'm a little bit of a late bloomer. It wasn't until 2015 when June came and we got permission to be married that I said to my mother, "Mom, guess what? We're getting married and I hope you'll come." And she did. And so we've been together 35 years now, 33 years now. So, I just know that the hiding, the legalities, I can't say anything because I don't want my kids taken away, and I can't, and all of that is what I lived with the majority of our relationship. And I don't want other people to live like that. And also being in long-term care, and I'm really proud where I'm at now. There's a tightrope with a philanthropic organization, but I have to say where I'm at now, I've seen opportunities, and I think our staff has really stepped up. I even have staff that are transgendered and are treated respectfully. So I think this just is a big picture that involves a lot of different people, and I'm just excited to be part of it because I'm getting closer every day too. So, yes. I am out at my facility. Yeah, and in fact, before I took this job, I did that. I also worked for the state health department for 7 years before I took this job. So in between long-term cares, I was a surveyor. And then, this place became available, and I had been there a number of times, and it's very close to where I lived, and I'm very honored to be there. But when I was interviewing, I made sure that was understood, and it was like, so what? So, I'm very pleased to be able to say that. Yeah.
Well, I'm John, and as you know, I'm married to this one. My best friend. Absolutely, hands down. I don't know what more I can add other than my professional life has kind of straddled between senior living and the Adamus board, for Warren and Clinton counties. It's my second stint with the board. I worked there from 2002 to 2005, and then they asked me back in 2016. So it's been a real thrill to be open and honest with that group of people, and even the providers that we work with. They are wonderful in accepting and helpful in two counties that are extremely conservative. So it's very, very helpful to have that affirmation out there in the workplace. But one of the issues that I got involved with, in addition to our issues here being lesbian, gay, bisexual, and making sure that those folks and all of us are welcomed wherever we go in our senior years. I also wanted to make sure that the medical care is cared for as a big part of that. I was motivated by my mother's experience going through Alzheimer's and some of the care that she did or didn't get going through that, and some of the questions we had that went unanswered, simply because some people didn't devote the time to her care while she was still living. So it's important to me to make sure that all of those questions are answered, that family is incorporated into care, and that all of our extended family, whether it's by family, biological family, or families of choice, are also included in that as well.
Sure. Thank you all very much for this wonderful presentation. You'd mentioned, Jerry, and I don't know if you were serious that you might be interested in returning. If you all would be, I would love it if we could do that, perhaps even on a larger scale in terms of company participation. That would be something wonderful. So thank you very, very much. Yes.
This is an article that just came out yesterday. Yeah, the 14th. So from the Columbus Dispatch, it's about more needs to be done to support aging LGBTQ adults, and we're featured in here. So we're pretty proud of that.
Someone online wants to know about your office in Dayton.
Pardon me?
Someone online wants to know about your office in Dayton.
Well, we sort of kind of have an office. It's actually at a church, and that's where our mailbox is, because this organization's sort of grew out of a United Church of Christ congregation. United Church of Christ, as you may know, is a very open and affirming denomination or congregation or denomination in the Christian church. And so Luann is a member there. I'm a member there. John's a member there. A couple of our other board members are there. But even Amy goes to a different United Church congregation. So it sort of sprung out of the church. And so they were kind enough to give us an office space and mailbox. But honestly, we don't spend much time there.
I think the question is how to contact you.
So we left some information here. Have a business card over there, but online that doesn't help them too much. You can go to rainboweldercare.org. Again, that's rainboweldercare.org, and that's our website, and our contact information is on there, phone number, etc. Like I said, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. So whatever platform suits you, you can find us. We're not on Snapchat though. That's a little too trendy for us.
You don't need to be on Snapchat. This is a first in our history that we've gone over in time and nobody logged off.
Oh.
Everybody stayed. We had 15 people online. Not
That's
bad.
either a testament to us, or they just really have really boring lives and nothing better to go on to.
They're pretty busy.
I mean, it is Monday night after all.
Thank you very, very much.
You had a question?
Masters in OSU.
Uh-huh.
I get their catalog.
Yeah.
And they just sent out that they've had this initiative in Columbus that something aging, I can't think of the first word, in Columbus, Ohio, and Franklin County. It's all about recognizing the needs of aging in business. And so when you pass out the Columbus Dish Percent, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we do in Dayton. In fact, that's what I do by day. I work for the public health department for Dayton Montgomery County, and my role is the LGBTQ health initiatives manager. So that's what I do by day. And so there is a what we call a health alliance. It's a community coalition collaboration, about 55 people in the Dayton Montgomery County area that are working on these issues. We have 6 action teams that this has just started over the last 6 months. We have 6 action teams that have launched, one on youth, aging, cultural competence, transgender issues, outreach and education, and mental health, substance abuse. So, yeah. 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 They do, Columbus does have, the Columbus Department of Health does have something they call the Health Collaborative, the LGBTQ Health Collaborative. So there is something that exists there. They're the only 2 health departments in Ohio that are focused on this right now. In terms of older LGBT organizations in Ohio, there is, you may have heard of SAGE USA. It's a national organization that focuses on advocacy and education for older LGBT people. They don't have affiliates in every city. They focus really on large cities. They do have an affiliate in Cleveland that's sort of managed out of the LGBT center there in Cleveland. They don't do all of the things that we do locally. They're really more of a social outlet. So they have a weekly lunch and they do some social activities. We do social activities sometimes too. Like we had a Labor Day cookout, and we have a LGBT veterans event coming up on November 11th. So we do some social things, but we're heavied up really more on things like this, education and cultural competence. We have a referral service, so you can call our phone, and if you need to get a referral to an attorney or a senior living community that's open and affirming, we can get you connected the right way. We're an all-volunteer organization, though, so understand that sometimes it might take us a day or so to get back to you. We're not a crisis helpline, but we can get you connected to services and service providers and healthcare providers that can be that can help you. Anything else? Yes.
That was just going to be my question.
My question was, if we had a client that we were working with at a facility where they felt like they weren't getting affirming services, you had mentioned this, the GLMA, which I was ashamed to admit I've never heard of it before. So this is something that you can use to look up and find providers.
Yes.
Okay.
Or you
wonderful.
can call, depending upon where you're. Obviously our service area is what we call the Miami Valley. So it's primarily Dayton and Montgomery County and contiguous counties. But we work with Miami University.
Who do you guys have a connection to anyone here in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area?
Through Miami University.
Okay.
There was an organization in Cincinnati a few years ago that sort of started to get traction, but they were mostly, again, social, and that's okay. Two social outlets are important. But they were mostly doing things like a pride booth, and like they do cooling stations at Pride booth or Pride for older people who, struggle with the heat. We do a similar kind of thing, but we can get connected. It's just as the farther south you come down this way, I have to work a lot more connections to get you there. Whereas it's more automatic because we're connected with our service area in Miami Valley.
Through my work, I have some contacts in Cincinnati area with attorneys for discrimination.
That's 100 years ago, I did my internship at AVOC in Cincinnati, which I don't think exists anymore. And I wasn't sure, who you guys recommend here in Cincinnati. Sorry, if any, a group to reach out to if you had, a client at a facility who, needed legal advice or a doctor that they felt was affirming.
Yeah, well, probably the best known. Correct me if I'm wrong, William. Probably the best known attorney in the Cincinnati area. You know, I'm going to say, right? Scott Knox.
I like Knox.
You mentioned a conference in February.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, can you say who's in?
Okay, so February 11th and 12th in Dayton at Sinclair Community College, we, along with some of our other community partners like the Area Agency on Aging, Ohio's Hospice, Miami University, Wright State University, AARP, will be holding a conference on LGBT aging. So it's a 2-day conference. There will be CEs attached to it. And we have all kinds of issues that we're covering in the breakout sessions. You know, everything from just basic Social Security issues you might want to know about and that are unique to LGBT people. We have some on dementia, end of life care, HIV and aging. Then we sort of have a general survey breakout session, survey course on LGBT aging. We do have the national leader of AARP's LGBT initiatives coming for that conference.
Great.
He will be one of the speakers. The gentleman who produced the film Gen Silent, Stu Maddox, will be coming. We'll be showing the film. He'll be speaking. And then we have a gentleman, Dr. Jason Flatt from the University of California, San Francisco. He just released what some people consider to be sort of groundbreaking first research around dementia in the LGBTQ community. So he was at the Alzheimer's International Conference. He's been sort of all over the sort of dementia, older adult, senior media lately. So he'll be there. We'll have sessions on affordable housing, senior living, full gamut of things. So I sent the flyer to you.
Awesome. That's great. We were able to show the sort of free clip of Gen Silent at some a training that we did recently,
Yeah.
and that just gave me the desire to see the whole film.
Yeah.
It looks like it's great.
It
So
is.
yeah, so I'm
It
really
is.
excited about that.
Yeah.
The ombudsman. The ombudsman that we have available to us through senior services, sometimes there's a lack in their ability to connect to issues or people. Are you available to consult, to advise? Do you interface with them?
We do in our area, but
But
we're willing. But we're willing to come and do that. You know, it's like anything else. You have to schedule it and figure out, you know, the logistics of it and everything. But certainly, we're open to doing it. Absolutely, we have done it up in our area. I mentioned the Health Alliance, the community coalition. So we have someone from the Ombudsman's office who's on that community coalition. But that comes after going and doing a couple of training sessions, education sessions with them. In fact, I will have to say that the first session that I did with them was probably one of the roughest sessions I've ever had, because you know they rely on volunteers, and at least where we are, and a lot of them get into the work because they have because of their faith.
Mhm.
And so I was running up against a lot of very strongly held, you know, religious beliefs, and that's fine. I'm open to that. I can handle it. I mean, I grew up in a fundamentalist Southern Baptist Christian household, so give me all you got. So, but it, you know, we're open to doing it, and we will if you.
Well, I'm delighted that you came tonight, but I am wondering, where are our Cincinnati people? Why don't we
I'll check
have
into-
a group?
I'll circle back to find out what happened to the group in Cincinnati. The last that I heard was about a year and a half ago, and I can't remember where now, somewhere sort of down in this area wanted someone to come and talk about this issue. And I said, first I said, no, there's a group in Cincinnati, contact them. Because, you know, it's, you got to figure out how to pull it off logistically. And the word that came back was they weren't at all prepared to do anything like that. So we went and did it. But I'm on the community advisory, there's an official name for it, the community advisory board for Miami University's social work department around LGBT issues. So I can track it through them, because the person who was sort of the advisor or sponsor of that organization in Cincinnati works at Miami. So I can track it back to find out if they're in existence and, you know, whether they're able to handle something.
You might want to invite Michael Ranney, who is the executive director of Ohio Psychological Association. This would be a great interest to him, and anything for our association.
How do you spell?
Ranney. I can give you a phone number.
Michael, did you say?
Michael. Mhm.
Okay. So I apologize when I answer questions. I'm a little bit like that person. You ask them what time it is, and they're like, well, you know, when you build a clock, you got to spray, blah, blah, blah. So you just have to tell me, like, just get to the point. Anything else? Any other questions? Oh, did you? Oh.
I think the people in the room deserve it.
So, oh, I have to say that? Oh, I've been told to convey to you that this is going to be a 2-hour CEU. Right, so that's a good thing, right?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you. Yes, so glad you guys came.
like that phone number? Or
Yes, if you got it, absolutely.
614 224 2059.
2059.
And then what is this?
This guy is our executive director.
The executive director for the Ohio Psychological Association. Oh, okay, great.
And if not, you just ask him.
Yeah. So I'll just tell you, I feel bad, and I feel bad in a way that my colleagues here didn't get to talk as much. But good. But all of our board members are over 50. Our oldest board member is 77. He's a veteran. He was instrumental in, he was sort of an activist with labor rights. So he helped get sexual orientation included in the UAW's non-discrimination policies. Oh my gosh, he's awesome. He's awesome. We thought he was coming tonight, and then honestly, he was a little intimidated. He's like, "You're doctors, right?" I don't think I can do that. So.
We intimidated somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, the counseling source is awesome.
But I think one of the things that makes us unique, if I can sum it up here, is that, you know, we do a variety of things. We do advocacy, education, referrals, and we do social things as well. But, you know, all of our board members, as I said, are 50 and older, and that matters. Some organizations have younger folks on their board, and I don't try not to hold that against them. But it matters if you live the experience. Lived experience matters, and that's where Dickie is the board member I mentioned, who's 77. His lived experience, like he didn't graduate from college. He's a wonderful guy, articulate, knowledgeable, well-read. When it comes to LGBT issues, he is on it like white on rice, and so he's wonderful. And his lived experience is something that just you can't learn. You know, you can't teach it. And so I think that's something that kind of sets us apart from other organizations that are doing what we do, who are very well-meaning and do good work. But I think we've got the best people, and we have a lot of knowledge, experience, you know, professional knowledge and experience, but wonderful lived experience as well. So thank you.
All right, everybody online, that is the end. You will be getting 2 full hours of continuing education credit. Thank you very much. Please remember to return your evaluation. Have a great night.